All right, item 4.1 is to acknowledge the first recipients of the Proudly Recognizing Individuals Demonstrating Excellence Award for 22-23 school year. So I'd ask the board to please join me out front so we can congratulate our winners.
Tonight, the Board of Education acknowledges Pride winners for the month of October. Pride stands for Proudly Recognizing Individuals Demonstrating Excellence. The Board of Education implemented this program in the fall of 2015 to recognize, promote, and celebrate the many contributions made by teachers and employees across the district. Teachers of the Month, sponsored by Allied First Bank, recognizes what our teachers do day in and day out for the continued growth and success of our students. Awardees, as your name is called, please come forward to be congratulated by the board and Dr. Sparlin. Congratulations to the following teachers for having been recognized as October Teachers of the Month. Dave Johnson, math teacher at Oswego High School. Katie Landers, a reading specialist at Southbury Elementary School. Heather Krause, a language arts teacher at Ben Narsick Junior High School. And Caitlin Wilson, a first grade teacher at Long Beach Elementary School. Congratulations, teachers. At this time, we invite the building administrators to come forward to join the awardees, the board, and Dr. Sparlin for a photo. The next awardees this evening are the October Employees of the Month, co-sponsored by Chick-fil-A and Huntington Learning Center. This award is given in appreciation of employees who go above and beyond and are always willing to lend a hand. Awardees, as your name is called, please come forward to be congratulated by the board and Dr. Sparlin. Congratulations to the following employees for having been named as October Employees of the Month. Katie Jones, Assistant Principal at Plank Junior High. And Pete Meismer, Assistant Principal at Hunt Club Elementary School. Congratulations, employees. At this time, we invite the building administrators to join with their employees, the board, and Dr. Sparlin for a photo. There we go. We thank our generous district partners, Allied First Bank, Chick-fil-A, Hunting Learning Center, and Culver's for helping to make this program a success. We would also like to thank all those who nominated individuals this month. I just want to do that part all the time.
5.1, there is no public comment. We'll move to 6.1, board member comments. Are there any comments for tonight from the board?
Go ahead.
I didn't have anything prepared, but you know, just with the fire, I just want to say I appreciate the community. You know, everybody looked out for each other. Or there was lots of support from first responders. Dr. Sparlin was there. I texted him, "Hey, what do you know?" He goes, "I'm here. You know, I'll as soon as I can get in, I'll let you know." So I was appreciative of that. So thank you. Thank you to the community too.
It's good to know that we always have community looking out, and their eyes are everywhere. So when things happen, they let us know. So it's a good thing.
That's for sure. You know what? I'd just like to echo what you said. The first responders too, they were there. They did police and fire. They did a fabulous job. I had conversations with both. Everybody very professional, and I think they were right. They were right there and got things done. It was good.
And this caused some interruption.
Disruption,
You know,
yeah.
for sure. But it could have been so much worse.
Yes.
And so I'm so thankful.
Thankful.
I just wanted to apologize. I had to leave our last board meeting to attend to a family emergency. So my thoughts might sound a little bit dated since it's the end of October, but I originally was hoping to share this with you at the October 11th meeting. October is Down Syndrome Awareness Month, a month to celebrate the many abilities of our friends, family, or community members that have a genetic disorder caused by an abnormal cell division, which results in an extra full or partial copy of chromosome 21. People with Down syndrome attend school, work, have meaningful relationships, get married, vote, and contribute to society in many amazing ways. I first started volunteering with Special Olympics in '97 and very proud to say that many of my friends rock that extra chromosome. And finally, I would like to send a huge thank you to our SD308 principals. You are the culture and climate curators of your buildings. You make thousands of decisions daily that affect the teaching and learning of your staff and your students, ultimately affecting every student outcome. You are the district and school's mission protector, making sure you clearly and consistently communicate to staff, parents, and students our mission every day through your decisions, guidance, and the standards that you set for your building. You foster standards for teaching and learning that are high and attainable. You provide clear goals and monitor the progress of your students towards meeting them. You spend hours in classrooms and hallways and playgrounds listening to students and staff during the highest highs and their lowest lows and every moment in between. You create an atmosphere of trust, sharing, and collaboration while trying to maintain a high level of energy and positivity, even at times when your own tank is empty. You make sure no student is left behind outside the school's circle of concern. You lead not from the apex, but from the center because of the trusted network of relationships that you've built with your district administrators, your teachers, your building staff, your students, your parents, your guardians, and the school community. And you are definitely the CEO of empathy. Thank you for taking on this enormous responsibility. Here in District 308, you matter and you are appreciated. Thank you.
Anyone else?
You know, last Friday was Principal Appreciation Day, and that's what Mrs. Johnson's referring to. So that you just took about this much of what I was going to say.
Sorry.
So no, that's great. Let's give them a round of applause because they do everything
Oh, yeah.
so much for our school.
All right, 6.2, board committee reports. We'll start with policy and legislative. Yeah.
Come on, Allie, it's your turn.
There's a big stack of papers here. Go ahead.
We have had some great policy reviews and discussions. Our last meeting was on October 17th. We talked about our uniform grievance procedure, policy 2:260. We had made some suggestions, and ultimately nothing changed other than some names. We did speak to our administrators and asked for procedures and policies to be communicated, and that any sort of investigations happen in a very timely manner so that all parties can come to a conclusion. We also reviewed policy 2:265, Title IX Sexual Harassment Grievance Procedure. We spoke in length about strengthening our positioning on sexual harassment here in the district, including in our policies. We added words such as safe and psychological and physical and safety, and making sure that employees and students know that we encourage them to report any sexual harassment or discrimination of any sexual nature, that we do not want them to feel like they are alone, that there are resources and services for them. And we did it all under the spirit of really supporting our students and everything that our student ambassadors and their committee have come forward with, to make sure that everyone is doing what they can in an environment that is safe. We reviewed operational services for :60. A lot of pushback from Allie and myself with regard to the threshold number that we have decided to go with. We had a lot of input from our policy committee last year that we felt very strongly about bringing it forward, because we have a very large committee, and everyone was in agreement that we really wanted to set that threshold from 25,000 to 20. We understand that Press and ISB feel that 25,000 is the number, but that we wanted to set an Illinois school code is the threshold. We wanted to set a precedent that we are really digging into the finances in the district, and that we felt it was very important to start at the policy level. And to get that desired policy transparency, we want it lowered, and we understood that we were going below the threshold that was necessary. Policy 4:140, student fees. We had a lot of discussion around the student fees, outstanding fees coming out of the last board meeting that we have. We did, on page 2, remove outstanding fees in order to make the policy compliant with Press. Number 5 was removed because it was changed in the school code. And we will continue more discussion both at the policy committee and with the board regarding student fees. We also agreed 5-0 to add outstanding student fees to the student handbook, because we felt it was more impactful for parents and students and guardians to see that information and the students' rights and responsibilities, because we probably don't have, and I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of people are probably not looking to read through all of our many policies, but we do feel that parents and guardians and students have to read that rights and responsibilities and sign off on it, so we felt it was very impactful in that place. Policy 5:10, equal employment opportunity and recruitment. We really didn't do much with this. We were consistent with what Press wanted, and under the first sentence in recruitment, we took out "and hire." 5:20, workplace harassment prohibited. We included to make sure that we sent the message, and our board attorney agreed that we were adding if you were if this investigation showed that something of some impropriety had taken place, it would include up to and including discharge. 7:20, harassment of students prohibited. We did add designee because there will be times where someone that is designated in our policy may not be available, but it will be the superintendent or designee should reasonable measures need to be taken. We added cyberbullying to the first paragraph because we realize this is something of high impact that is going on with a lot of students these days. We also added, again, under enforcement, up to and including discharge. And finally, policy 7:180, preventing bullying, intimidation, and harassment. The policy is posted with the name changes of the non-discrimination coordinator and the district complaint managers. We did request to get input from the student ambassador committee on how to better address the bullying issue, as we know that is something that has been brought forward to the board many times, and we have shared that with Dr. Sparlin, so I know that that will be talked about in your student committee. Allie, did you want to add anything?
That's pretty much it.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yes.
Are we bringing back student fees to discuss again, and what's the timeline on that? Do we know? And it's not necessarily directed at you, but I'm just curious in general.
Yes, we will be bringing back student fees, and Dr. Pesky, I know you have more to say about that, but I know when we talked about like changing the student fees, that bringing that conversation back up in time so we could get it in the correct publications for next year, correct?
Correct. And can we though, before next year, find out if they can fix that payment plan that we had talked about?
Yes.
Like, can they pay us?
Yeah, I think we
'Cause
wanted to
that's
fix
pretty
the inequities
That's
and then discuss
important
the
to
fees
do
for next
Exactly.
year.
That is, but some of it is policy and some of it is procedure.
Yeah.
So that is more procedural. The policy will probably still move forward for first read and so forth. But we know that, and I know Dr. Kincaid has shared with us that it is something that is on her, from a procedural standpoint, is on their administrative to-do list. So that's continuing.
So this is a policy that, I was planning on bringing it up during the policy discussion. Maybe is that a more appropriate time?
That's fine, do it. What do you got?
Well, no,
No, you can talk
this is
about
a policy that has
Yes,
financial implications.
what Maureen has.
So I would want to hear those.
What Maureen has shared with us and impressed upon us is when it comes to the policy, we want to make sure that the administration isn't either, prevented from doing their work or so forth. So clearly we can talk about it, but I think in this regard, it's about what the changes we made to the policy. Talking more about the student fees will come at an agenda point.
Well, the change to the policy, there is a financial impact.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there just is. So I would.
And that's why
I'd be-
the reasons what we're going to talk about, like to put it in a bigger context, we are going to present the 5-year projection. So kind of take a look at our financial position and then those options like an A, B, or C. If we were to reduce the fees and reduce the revenue from fees, what would that look like in light of our financial projections?
Okay, if you come prepared with the dollar amount for this particular policy change, then, like I said, I want to fix those inequities now. So.
And the other thing that will take place on the policy committee is we will, I don't remember the timing, but we will actually bring forward the student rights and responsibilities, and we will go through it painstakingly, word for word, and that will be another time where we talk about what it is we want to communicate to our families about student fees. So again, we want to make sure that the policy is more of the umbrella of there will be student fees, and that if there is outstanding fees, there will be a process, but that needs to be handled procedurally. Is that fair, Maureen?
Yeah, it's just the policy as it is today is meant as a deterrent, right?
Yes,
So
and we
a
did take that.
punishment.
We did take that out. Yeah.
So that's the part that, obviously, if there's no,
Right.
so.
And Dr. Kincaid did also share with us what is required in press. And so now we have a policy that has been reviewed by all of their lawyers, and we feel that it is very consistent, and it will allow our administrators to make more of an impact in the students' rights and responsibilities and at the procedural level.
Okay. I think I'm good.
Okay. Now we'll have our committee report for teaching and learning.
Let me shift gears here. Teaching and Learning Committee met Tuesday, October 18th. Deep dove particularly into the first two topics, which was junior high and high school math, and then we did touch on the reading curriculum and also, the walkthrough process and then administrative training. So the junior high and elementary, we discussed the utilization of collaborative structures and additional tool in the teaching toolbox. It's groups of students working together, but with individual accountability and equal roles, utilizing leadership to model and describe usage. And Faith, correct me where I'm wrong, okay?
We just did an overview of the district improvement and school improvement plan process, and then highlighted some of the things from this year's plans.
Yep. And utilizing math vocabulary or standardizing math vocabulary so students aren't suddenly introduced to new vocabulary as they move into new grades and levels. So this should help each kid. You can't change everything all at once. It's kind of the theory there. Utilizing success factors in period 1 in junior high to fill in gaps in math. High school math, again, collaborative structured training, utilizing department chairs. It's all about engaging students. It's kind of the example that if explicit instruction is very important, but you might not be engaging every single student, whereas with the collaborative structure, you're more likely to have more engagement amongst the students.
And there's more student-to-student interaction taking place,
Right.
where the educators see a greater increase in student understanding and learning with that collaborative instruction. Excuse me.
And again, this is just meant as a tool in the toolbox. It's used in conjunction with explicit instruction and independent learning. It increases student voice. It helps to build intellectual curiosity and ability to process information. Reading, the framework is now established, I believe, throughout, right?
Yes, our math framework is now K through 12, and I would even say for our Brokaw learners out there, early childhood past, and then we have extended portions of the literacy framework to also be in high school now.
Okay. Look to determine what's working for broad implementation, right? Utilizing success factors in period 1 for junior high to allow for more independent reading. Another way to improve love for and ability to read. The walkthrough process. It was stressed that this is not meant for punitive purposes. Communicate the positive. Point is to see how we are doing on classroom techniques. And the feedback is based on frameworks for learning. And the last topic we discussed was that administrative training. I think that was maybe the last 2 or 3 minutes, so I require more conversation to be able to speak to that. And then overall, it's good to hear that we are implementing practices shown to be effective, utilizes student voice, improves engagement, and ultimately student achievement.
What I really liked about what the administration was sharing is the level of the addressing, and I think we spoke very directly that our numbers from a reading standpoint and from math standpoint for FastBridge and IAR are not where we want them to be. I don't think anybody is hiding that matter, and I think the administration more than anybody realizes that there is a lot of work ahead of them, but it was nice to see that we saw some growth, that a little bit more than they expected, so that was nice to hear. And one of the things that we talked about was the IAR, the Illinois readiness versus the FastBridge, which is the assessment we use in the district. And do they align? Our FastBridge actually is a tool that allows us to better assess, really get more into where our students need help. So that was great to hear. And then we talked a lot about Success Maker and where it's helping fill the gaps for our students. And
I said success factors.
yeah, I was like, I just want to make sure that we talk Success Maker. One of the things that I highlighted was that we've added 41 minutes of math to junior high. I think that's incredibly important. We talked about how we talk a lot about elementary and we talk a lot about high school, but sometimes we kind of forget about our junior high kiddos and how important that is. And the only one thing I want to say about collaborative structures, because I was asking how much time we are spending on that, and I think it's awesome, but to make sure that it is just a tool in our toolbox. And I really liked what Faith said, that it's working together, but individuals are accountable. So it's letting the students work together, but there's still an individual accountability for each of them. So I really liked hearing about what is being done at the different levels, and behaviorally in the 7th and 8th grade years, they're really also looking and putting a focus on executive function. So I really appreciated hearing all of that. And I will say that it is very tough right now. I know that article is swirling around, and it's been on the news today already about the nationwide scores for reading and math. And I know that there is a lot going on at the administrative and the educator level to address that in our district.
Can I ask a quick question about that improvement? I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead. Just a quick question. The improvement, is the benchmark for that improvement pre or post-COVID?
So we went to the FastBridge assessment is relatively new for this district, so there isn't really a pre-COVID measure of what that would look like. But we were looking at our Envision 308 we said we wanted a 10 percentage point jump or increase, and we set that pre-COVID. So we were concerned because our students are coming in lower than where they were at, whether that rate of growth would apply. And we're happy to say that we're exceeding that rate of growth, at least so far.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see that report, but the good news on that report is that since COVID, we're seeing growth. So that's the good news.
Yes.
I'm curious, when you brought up plans and so forth, and why it's escaping me, I don't know, and I apologize.
I know you tried to say something 3 times.
What's that?
I said I know you tried to say something 3 times.
No, that's fine. That's okay. Did we look at like climate and I'll
Oh, yes.
okay, and I'm curious, and I'm really glad you brought up junior high, because agreed, it's something that tragically gets, and I could sit here and talk about societal constructs as to why I think junior high is working against itself. But speaking of constructs, I'm curious if the conversation ever comes up. I know it sounds minor, and I know it doesn't sound like something that would affect everything, but I really, really honestly think it has a bigger impact than we give it credit for. The fact that our 41-minute lunch for junior high, I'm curious if we were having that conversation, because it just seems like a huge heavy lift for the students, but also our staff. And I mean, unstructured time is really our worst enemy. And I'm curious if that conversation came up.
What?
A little?
Too little of unstructured time, or what? Is that what you're saying?
No, 41 minutes is an eternity for lunch.
Okay.
I mean,
I just wasn't sure what the concern.
no, I don't think anyone wants more than 41 minutes for lunch.
But they also
This is
lose
the United
their
States.
recess when they're transitioning to. I think it's important for like the 6th grade, because they're transitioning to a little bit more structured. Well, I'm just gonna tell you how I feel.
They won't need it all that maybe like they might need that for like a week or two, but
Okay, fair enough. We did, though, I will say, we did really talk about gender data and the numbers that we're seeing in the district and how it affects instruction. And Faith has been digging into that for quite a while now, but she's really digging into it now, looking at our math and reading numbers. And so obviously you will disaggregate data more and more as you learn more, but she really feels right now that that's something that she and her team need to focus on. So we talked about that in culture and climate discussion. So I think that, Jared, to your point, not only would I think that's interesting, and I think I would like our administration to look at that. And I'm gonna say something, and I feel like that I have to say it, but I know it's a very loaded topic. But we really need to look out with our busing issues at start times for high school and elementary. Our elementary kids and our high school kids were getting to school this week at 9:18, so they were missing their first couple of periods. So I hope that that's a discussion that we can have. I know it's loaded. I know whenever it's talked about in the community, everybody has a feeling, but high schoolers losing 2 periods of time, and I don't see the busing situation getting tremendously better. And the other thing on the flip side is we really can't have our most vulnerable elementary students waiting for a bus out there on their own. So
Those are
speaking of
conversations that
societal
we're having.
constructs.
what?
Speaking of societal constructs.
Right.
Yeah.
But also with regards to if we're really digging in on the instructional side, missing 2 periods isn't, so maybe we need to look at a more holistic approach.
Sorry, Dr. Sparlin. Go ahead.
No, I just mentioned that those are conversations that we're having, and it's a loaded question. There's not real good answers to it, so we're looking into it
Yeah.
because we have the same concerns you just mentioned, Jen.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about prioritization and, where do you get the most impact with finances, but we've also challenged, like if there's things that we can do, kind of like things that you're saying that really would have limited impact on finances that can help improve. So I'm not saying that you don't have to have an answer or anything, but we just say for teaching and learning. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we didn't answer your question. So Shannon Luders and I and team each year that I've been here have talked about how do we reduce lunch at the junior high, and it's a pretty complicated how many supervisions and how much staff we have to be able to have those students do other things than have lunch. So it is something we want to look into, and there are some things as we go into next year and to conversations around contract and all of those things that we'd like to explore to have some more opportunities to change that.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, is that it? Anyone else want to make any comments? All right, 6.3, Superintendent.
No, I don't know if anybody had any about the Community Advisory Committee.
I'll speak to it.
You'll speak to it later.
Yes.
Okay, 6.3, Superintendent's Report.
All right. Saturday, October 22nd was school bus driver appreciation day, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of our employees of the OTA for everything they do. As we know, for many of our students, a bus driver is the first employee they see in the day, and they greet them with a good morning, and they're the last employee that they see at the end of the day, and they tell them to have a great evening. And as simple as that sounds, it's a big deal, and it's very appreciated. And I'd like to thank all of our SD308 OTA members for everything that they do. So on October 19th, we held the first meeting of the newly formed Community Advisory Committee. We began the meeting with a little icebreaker activity with some trivia on SD308. We did a getting to know you activity. Creating relationships with that committee, with that large committee, is important, and we spent some time doing that. We covered some housekeeping items with the procedures and the open meetings requirement. And then Dr. Petsky provided a presentation on different aspects of school finance, which was very informative. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for questions on the presentation, but the presentation prior to that, we did a 3-2-1 activity where we gave them a document and we asked them to write down 3 things that they noticed or learned from the budget presentation, 2 items that they would want others in the community to know, and 1 question that they may have had, and we'll utilize that committee feedback in regards to building some of the agenda for the next meeting. I received an email from one of the committee members after the meeting, and I'm going to share a small portion of it. They said that was a very informative meeting. I learned a lot about the inner workings of the school district. I think the most eye-opening thing for me as a community member was seeing how efficient we have been with the money we have available to us. That is definitely not the view amongst taxpayers. How can we work together to get that message out to the community at large? I think if we did that, it would help increase and help people with knowing that their money is spent wisely. So that's something that Dr. Petsky and I are working on. He's working on an infographic that he will have on the website, information to disseminate, something he's going to share at the next committee as we wrap up the presentation from that first meeting. And as I talked with a few people as they left, they seemed to say that the meeting was informative, and they were looking forward to the next meeting.
There was a lot of discussions afterwards. Yeah. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yes, there were a lot of discussions afterwards. People kind of stuck around and were talking, so I was able to kind of float around and listen to some of those discussions, and they seem very positive. I don't know if you wanted to share anything else with that in regards to that. You had the opportunity to participate in the meeting, Dominic. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Last second. But it was good. You know, the people that are in the finance committee said, yeah, we've gone through this information, and but I think that we tied in multiple committees and how finance impacts everything, and how teaching and learning impacts finance, and how diversity and equity, impacts finance, impacts everything. So and then policy as well.
And teaching
So,
and learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the goal. We knew the that was the goal exactly. So thank you for saying that, because we knew the finance people would know, that would information that they'd probably seen before. But for 3/4 of that committee or more, that was all new information, and we tried to tie the 4 committees together, and the message that we sent. So it sounds like we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think so.
Dr. Sparlin, do you have those numbers in front of you?
Which numbers?
Well, since it is bus driver appreciation, I wondered, do you know the number, the one that I was shocked about how many miles we drive?
Oh, yes, we drive annually about 2.5 million miles, or how many times around the Earth?
I don't know.
I forgot, but it was
Yeah.
many times.
It
around
was
the earth.
250 maybe?
Yeah, 250. It would be 250. Yes, 250 times around the Earth
In 1 year.
in 1 year.
In 1 year.
Annually, yes. I mean, we have a lot of kids that ride the bus, and we pick them up in the morning, and we drop them off in the evening, and we have some shuttles during the day, and those miles definitely add up.
Amazing.
So my final item that I wanted to mention is that on November 7th at 7 p.m., we have our first public forum of the year. The theme for the evening is improving academic achievement, and the format for this forum will be different than what we've done in the past, and it will be one that promotes conversation and dialogue between board members, district level leaders, and the community. So it's something I think we're really looking forward to. And we're going to have 6 tables set up. One, an EL table, a DEI, a special ed, a student services / HR, a finance, and a general education table will be set up. And we're going to have 3 15-minute sessions to provide the community members with the opportunity to visit each the different stations. The board and directors will be at those tables. They'll introduce themselves. They'll talk a little bit about what they're doing in their department to increase academic achievement. And then the rest of that time for each one of those sessions will be Q&A between the community members, board members, and district administration. And at the beginning of the presentation, Faith is going to put a short presentation on what we're doing to improve academic achievement to kick off the evening. So looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great evening. And community members, if you're listening, we hope you come out. That's my, I know that was a little long-winded, Mrs. Hamilton, but
Well,
that's the update.
Say the date again.
November 16th at Trauber Junior High at 7 o'clock p.m.
And then
No.
I would-
November what?
November 7th.
7th. Thank
Seventh.
you.
yeah,
Wait a second. What was that date?
I shouldn't have asked you to repeat it.
November 7th.
November 7th.
November
That's right.
7th.
7 p.m.
Thank you, Dr. Sparlin.
You're welcome.
6.4, student ambassador reports.
Hi, everyone. At our last student advisory committee, we finalized our PowerPoint slide and flyer that describes the committee, our goals, and mentions that we're looking for new members. These resources will soon be available to students, which is very exciting. We also made substantial edits to our Google form through which applicants will describe themselves, their identity, and their goals with the Student Advisory Committee. We changed some of the language and in the demographics and free response questions for inclusivity and clarity purposes. We added visual resources such as an identity wheel to guide our applicants through an open answer question. Our veteran members have also been preparing for the III conference, where we hope to represent the goals of our Student Advisory Committee and how our school district is working on amplifying student voices, concerns, and ideas on a broader scale to unify our board and our student bodies through our past and current research. We discussed some of the major ideas we want to emphasize at the conference with Dr. Waller and are currently working on the slideshow for this.
Thank you.
And before I go more into what we further accomplished at our last committee meeting, I just want to say how thankful I am, as I know many students will be, for the policy work on bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment that was mentioned earlier. Our student advisory is dedicated, as we know our board and our district is, to contributing to progress in the area, and from our end, that'll be through continuous research and insight into student voice. So thank you for that. After the application finalizations and conference preparations that Caitlin had mentioned were finalized and we finished that, we did continue our student advisory committee meeting by going through our data from our first student survey that was administered last year, which was new for the majority of our committee. And just to review the survey, determine some of the focal issues our students identified across several fields, such as academic focus, school structures, social climate, and student-to-student interactions. Through deep analysis of these results, we've decided not to conduct another student survey and instead focus on what was highlighted in the responses of our first student survey and is prevalent across the nation inside and outside of academic settings, and this we decided to be mental health. We recognize that mental health, as impacted by faculty to student interactions and student to student interactions, is a very multifaceted issue that spreads across and impacts a wide range of students, and this stems from bullying, academic consistency, the necessity for two-way communication, and mutual empathy, understanding, and trust between faculty and students. So instead of conducting another student survey, we thought it would be best to begin formulating another student survey that focused on the issue of mental health through the lens of how the learning environment impacts it, and gather results from there to centralize our research in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. 7.1 consent agenda. Are there any questions on the consent agenda?
I do want to make a statement that Mrs. Swanson and I did speak about the Freedom of Information request process and procedure, and we have added it to our next policy committee meeting. The last time the FOIA policy was reviewed was 2019, so we will be reviewing it to see if we want to make any changes or and bring it back to the board for a read and feedback. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I make a motion to approve all items under consent, including 7.1, minutes from the Board of Education meeting on October 11th, 2022, open and closed session, and 7.2 to acknowledge the FOIA request received by the district.
Second.
Ms. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Cerrone,
Aye.
Ms. Simulton,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Ms. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Ploger.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
Item 8.1 is information on a transportation fuel bid. Dr. Pesky?
Yeah, so we had a 3-year contract that expires in December, so we went out to bid again to renew our fuel bid contract. So included in the board information today is the results of that bid. Did have a question, so I'll say the way that the fuel bid works and the numbers that you see on your information packet here, we use a service called the Oil Price Information Service, or OPIS. And OPIS kind of sets the price on what they call rack fuel. So rack fuel is typically if you buy 8,000 gallons or more, and we have a 12,000 gallon tank. So we do buy the rack pricing. And so the numbers represented on here are we pay the rack price, whatever the price is for fuel that day when we get it delivered, plus a margin. And in this case for fuel, with the winning bid, we were at a 0.0337, and now we're going up 0.0361, so less than a half a cent per gallon. Question came up, what were the differences between the bids? Last year we spent about $625,000 on fuel, and in that fuel, the margin that we paid to our provider was about $21,000. This low bid here would represent about $22,500, or about $1,500 more than we paid last year. And the highest bid would have been about $36,000, so it would have been about $14,000 more than what we paid last year. So that's kind of how the numbers break down. And it is our existing supplier for the last 3 years was the low bid again this time. So we work with petroleum trades.
So every time we get a delivery of fuel, we pay a different price?
We do. We pay whatever the price for fuel is that day, the rack price.
Okay, so it's just like if you go to a bank to get a mortgage, whatever the interest rate is that day, that's what you get. Okay.
Yep. Or maybe a better analogy is every time you go to the gas pump.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, thank you, Dr. Pesky. Item 8.2 was a first read on 7 policies. Does the board have any questions on what has been provided? I think you covered most of it in your policy report, but
There's one that I want to, it is policy 4.60. I would, currently, and I know that Ms. Johnson said that there was lots of discussion in regards to moving that dollar amount down. I would also ask that we can, I'm proposing that we also include language not just for contracts, but that dollar amount threshold also include any vendor, so that the same level of reporting and information that we receive based on what's presented for contracts that are above that threshold, that it includes vendors for that amount as well, so that, you know, hypothetically, if a vendor reaches the threshold that's mentioned, although they may not have a written contractual agreement, it would still be something that's visible to the board so that we can review, et cetera. So I don't know what the language would look like, but I'm just recommending that we add in vendors as well.
Just off the top of my head, my concerns would be, is that a barrier for them doing their job? And how typical would that be? Those are the two things I would want to
I think if I heard you correctly, Mr. Gay, what you're talking about is it's an informational.
Correct, informational. So just
Right.
when I'm not asking anything else to be done, just that once it's, once it reaches that threshold, that we're just aware of whatever those contracted amounts are. And Dr. Sparling, correct me if I'm wrong, was that something that was done in the past, or something similar to a report, that some type of report that was provided to the previous boards on a consistent basis?
And I don't think so, no. We have the contracts, as Dr. Pesky said, anything that's over 25,000 are on the website. And like I said, I heard you with the vendors, anything, once we get up to that minimum of 20,000, it looks like, then it needs to trigger communication, as well as, I think we talked about adding something on the website as well.
Yeah, we could do the website just like we do contractors. We could do the contractors and vendors at 20,000. But to bring it to the board's attention, we had mentioned maybe just adding a note on the consent agenda saying, hey, a vendor reached that 20,000 limit, just so you're aware. If there's any questions about it, you can take it off and ask. Otherwise, it's just a consent item.
So I don't want to gloss over Dominic's statement, because I do want to make sure that I don't answer for you when he says, are we adding any additional work? So you guys can confirm that. And yes, I think that would be great, that if it's added to the consent agenda, and I guess I'm adding this caveat so that you can consider what I'm saying. And then that, I would say, not add and remove, but add and leave as a running tally. Leave that number on there.
Yes.
Is that additional work?
Okay. Can kind of treat it like the FOIA requests, only have that running total for the year. So
Correct.
Yep, we can figure that out.
I do
It's a vendor
think,
spend
though,
report
that we don't necessarily
periodically, right?
need to change the policy. I think that the administrators, and you can, the three of you can answer me, and you, Dr. Sparlin, I think this board has been very clear that we are asking for complete transparency with finances, that we have felt, and I won't speak for everybody else, I'll speak for myself, I'm sorry, that we've had to sometimes pull information and it's taken a long time to get it. I know that I've spoken with both Dr. Petsky and Dr. Kincaid, and Dr. Kincaid and I spoke last week about what types of reports are going to be helpful for the board. Everybody that I've spoken to has been very open to say, we will get you what you need to help make better financial decisions. The only caveat, putting it in a policy, well then, once a new board is in place, a new policy committee is in place, it just becomes a little bit heavy-handed to do. So I do believe that at this point, and now in public, in an open session, we have stated that we are looking for the most transparency we can, so that when we have our fiduciary responsibilities, we know everything that's happening, and there's no kind of gotchas, so.
Agree, and I see that, because to Dominic's point, I'm not asking that we have to approve any vendor that's above 20,000, because that would be an undue burden. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking to have visibility to it.
Dr. Kincaid, do you have anything to add?
No, and just in addition to that, the policy discussion was around purchases that are not previously approved. So that would come through to the board for approval at that $20,000 to $25,000 limit. We are not looking to change the bid procedures of $25,000.
No.
It would just be that 20 to 25 as a unbudgeted expenditure coming forward first before purchase.
And we spoke in depth about the difference between operational and instructional. Instructional is somewhat cut and dry, if you will. They have to fill out a budget that has to go to ISB and be approved, and we see all that and that's approved. It's more the operational side of things. We're really trying to streamline processes and create economies of scale. Everybody has heard me whining about paper in this district and how we buy paper, and really was a simple example, but of, you know, where can we look for economies of scale? And so we're really focused on the operational side of things. So thank
Agreed.
you for kind of confirming what we were talking about in our committee
Great.
meeting.
Makes me happy.
Very good. Item 8.3 is a 5-year projection scenarios and variance report. So, Dr. Petsy?
Yeah, so in the memo for this, just to add a little bit of context, wanted to highlight for the board what are some of the revenue assumptions and what are some of the expenditure assumptions that are built into these 5-year projections. And then there are 4 different 5-year projections that we'll look at that the board has asked for last year that we provided, and these are to complement what we gave last year. And then in addition to the 5-year projections, we also have the year-over-year changes, so the previous 5-year changes that you would have seen. So real quick, one thing to point out are we've got the revenue assumptions of equalized assessed value. Our property values going up about 4.5% per year. We've got new property of about $20 million each year built into these projections. We also have a CPI estimate, and this year we know for 2021, and for this year's CPI for the levy, it'll be 5%. Every year after that, the levy has typically been around, or the CPI has typically been around 2%. And then CPPRT, our revenues from that, our evidence-based funding, we have a 4% growth in our evidence-based foundation level every year. And then we also have our federal grants and our mandated categorical estimates in there for revenue. So as far as some of the expenditure highlights that we have, really a lot of that is collective bargaining agreement increases with our 4 different unions and what we're doing there. Our medical plan increases, we have at about 5% every year. Our department budget increases go up about 1% per year. Our purchase services, transportation, food service, things of that nature go up about 2.5%. And we've built in a contingency, staffing contingency, and operations and maintenance. If there's, say, a firework that goes off on a roof and we need to repair that, it's nice to have some of those contingencies in place. And then in addition to what's included in these as an expense for the 5-year projections are the curriculum renewal expenses that we'll have over the next 5 years as well.
Can I ask a quick question? I don't mean to interrupt right from the gate, but I do have a question. Is it if and notice I say if inflation does stay high, I'm assuming we would see 2 things. One, we could, I do want to emphasize we could see a higher CPI in 2024.
Correct.
We could, though, also see some of these expenses on the other side be higher as well, correct?
Yep, that's
okay.
Exactly right.
So yeah, if CPI is 8% and our purchase goods go up 8% and salaries have to go up more than 5% and our levy capped at 5%, then obviously we're in the negative. We would be able to produce. We would spend. We would get less for the money.
Mr. Sherome, could you just said some really great stuff. Can you speak into the microphone a little bit more so make sure everybody's
right
heringing what you're saying?
Right there by the microphone. I don't know what's going on.
You got to get a little closer.
I've got it closer than anybody. All I was saying is, so if inflation is 8%, then our purchased goods and salaries and stuff along those lines could very well be over 5%, which is our cap for the levy.
Correct.
So we would be, if that were the case, we would have to cut services essentially.
Well, or, right, which is the whole reason I asked for this in the first place.
Or we would go into
we would become very dependent on not just the levy, but the levy and EBF, which was the whole reason I asked for this in the first place, because here you are experiencing now for the first time inflation above CPI, and if you aren't capturing the levy and EBF, which I'm sorry because we're going to get into this conversation, I know, then you're not just talking about walking away from a levy. If you're talking about walking away from a levy, you should be coming with a list of cuts. But we'll get into that, sorry.
Well, but I think it's also very important to almost fill in the blanks. When we didn't capture that in the past, the compound of that now, we're looking at about, and I've said this number before and people have questioned me, but we've not captured about $50 million. And when you think about that and where we're at today, that was a decision that was made by the board at the time, and I understand it. At the time, they did what they felt was best, but this is where we are now, and I think it's important to continue to talk about how history catches up with itself, and here's where we are today. So we have to continue to capture as much as we can, because some things are not, I mean, EBF is, what, was 10 years? And where are we at?
I think we're in year 4, but
Year
the
4?
but the bill is, or the spending piece is 10 years, yeah.
Right. So all of these things come into play, but I think it's very important that why we are capturing the full amount too as well, that we would be needing to do that.
Yeah, and I can revisit that because this is a piece when we talk about the levy here in another month and a half. I can talk about the impact of the levy at 5% and what that means. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a feeling that would be offset by increased expenditures. So I think that this is appropriate. Now, if we were to say inflation is at 10% a year, what would that mean? Then I think you'd be looking at a totally different graph.
Yeah.
So
with those revenue and expenditure assumptions out there, what I've provided for you on this first one, I think the first thing to point out is at the very top of this sheet, there are, as you remember, there's 9 different funds in education, but the sheets that we're sharing you for the projections are only 5 of those funds, and they're listed at the top. So the balances, the revenues, the expenditures are only reflective of the education fund, the operations and maintenance fund, the transportation fund, some IMRF Social Security spending, and then also our working cash, which just has a little bit of revenue and no expenditures because we interfund loan those to where we need.
What's not there?
What's that?
What's not there?
What's not there? The big ones that are not there, there's 2 big ones that that we use, which is our debt service, which is about $33 million to pay off our outstanding debt every year. And that fund also has a small fund balance. And then also what's not on there is capital projects, Fund 60, which kind of mirrors the operations and maintenance, what we do on a day-to-day basis, but then you've got your capital projects for like our DSEB dollars and things of that nature.
Mr. Gatewood, you know what was interesting at the committee meeting the other day? Dr. Petsky put up a tax bill, and he talked about the debt service, and a lot of people didn't realize that we have a debt service of $36 million a year, and what percentage of that debt service makes up the total tax bill, and when in 2034, when that debt service goes away, the difference that'll make in regards to the people's taxes. It was a really good point that what you just said reminded me of that.
And then those numbers break down to, if you look at our educational tax rate, we're at about 4.8%. But we also have to collect the $36 million to pay the debt service, which is an additional 1.6% to a homeowner. So on a $300,000 home, you know, your taxes for the school would be about $4,800. But then you also have to add on to that the 1.6% or $1,600 in debt service. So if you compare us to other school districts, we have a taxing rate of about 6.4%, where other districts who don't have that debt service only have about 4.6, 4.8%. We're right there if we didn't have the debt service.
Which I think is important, because you will hear people in this district, and they'll say, I don't understand where all my tax dollars are going to. My taxes are, you know, this high. And in their defense, in defense for people who say that, it does feel very high for good reason, because and as I point out to people, because you are making basically multiple mortgage payments on buildings that are not paid off.
Thank you for saying that.
And we talk about
the fast growth.
Right, and we talk about this committee that's trying to combine all these pieces. The part that frustrates me as an educator, we talk about you know, making sure that our students understand the federal piece and understand the state piece. But let's face it, and let's be honest with ourselves. And you know, I'll advocate this till I'm blue in the face. When are our citizens educated on these local aspects, these local levers? And the answer is they're not. You know, and we don't teach this stuff. We don't educate this. We do not teach this. We expect someone to go out and buy a house and just figure it out. That's how we operate, right? And Illinois is not the only state with high property taxes. I'm not saying Illinois is a low tax state, so please do not misconstrue my comments. I understand that Illinois is a high tax state. Illinois is not the only state with these issues. Even places that we think are low property tax states, they're not, and they're experiencing the same problems because they're having high growth. And they're having the same problems for the same reasons, because when people move in large numbers, there has to be infrastructure, and they have to build, and they have debt. And we don't teach this stuff. It's not fun. I mean, we have student ambassadors. How would you take a class on local governance and sit here and take a class about talking about local property taxes? Would you be like, yeah, let's talk about local property taxes?
The answer is yes.
Yes. I love property taxes.
Yes?
Don't tell Mr. Ploger no.
No. You could definitely tell me no, because if you're being authentic and honest, that's exactly what I want, right?
Like, if I'm being authentic and honest, like, I wouldn't. But I do know some people who are actually genuinely interested in that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if the enrollment rate would be high enough.
Right, that's exactly right. It might be like somebody like me and one other person, right? And I get
So,
it.
but this is one of the reasons why this new structure helps to support exactly what you're saying, because I understand that Dr. Pesky offered people to bring their tax bills to the next meeting. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I know that they do in other districts, where they just have meetings where people bring their tax bills and they have all kinds of conversations around the questions that they have and the answers that are there for them.
And I think it's the piece that frustrates many of our community members, is because they see that rate that you're talking about, that 6% rate, they don't understand why we don't have a parking lot, why our football field is the way it is compared to other football fields, why we have roofs that need repairing, why we have HVAC systems that go out, why we have some of the issues that we have. And the reason is, when you look at the tax rate that is going towards the actual operational portion of the school district, it is not high.
Well, yeah, because at one point,
it's at a low percentage.
We were the fastest growing district in the state of Illinois, and we doubled in size. and in the
country.
nation, and we doubled in size. And so we had to build, how many schools did we build at one time?
We were 2 or 3 a year,
2 or 3 a year for what?
many years.
Many years. That cost us, what, $300 million or
No,
something like
450
that?
million, I think,
More like,
right?
yeah, more like 500 million.
Okay. And so now so people can understand why we have the debt service that we have.
So
But I also think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dominic.
I was at the advisory committee, and you know, I said, so when this $1,600, when the debt's paid off, what happens with that $1,600? Oh, we'll just find another way to spend it, right? But no, we're legally obligated.
Right.
We can't collect it. We collect what we are paying for the debt obligation. It's a wash. So once there's no debt obligation, then that goes away. So that was just something that a lot of people like, oh, you know, and then they started to realize, and yeah, because of the cross-functional nature of this being new information, people were leaving with a lot more understanding.
But I sat in the audience of the committee meeting, and the next part of that is what our district does with the money that we do have. And back to Dr. Sparlin shared this earlier, but when you see the numbers of what we do with $7,000 or $8,000 versus what the rest of the state does with $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, we are incredibly efficient. And so when we have to go make cuts, it hurts really deep because we are already at a very efficient district. And are we perfect? Nope. Or do we need to constantly be looking for ways to save? Yes. But I think that is very important. The second thing is we also have to get out of this mindset that we've been in of kind of this payday loan mindset where we just have to do what we have to do today. At some point, we have to shift our thinking and start looking into the future and making decisions that may hurt short term, but will provide long-term relief. And I think that's what I've really struggled with. And to Jared's point, I was that community member. I was like, not another tax. This is ridiculous. And until I really sat on this board, I did not understand it all. And that information is not readily available. You really have to be a dot connector, and I didn't have the skills to do that. Yeah. And so somehow we as a board need to make sure that that is clear and provide that information at people's fingertips.
I just want to connect one more dot. I know it's not on here, but I think this is very important. Earlier you said that one of the funds that was not represented was the capital expense or capital expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
So capital projects. So when you look at the line for surplus and you go out to 2027, it's exciting because that says $6.1 million. So tell me, based on how many buildings, we have 22 buildings, what's the overall cost per year to service those buildings? How much do we have, and how would it impact this surplus number?
Well, and that's what's interesting because we've been a district that's been building, we've been issuing referendum dollars to pay for the building and the maintenance of our old buildings, and then now for the last, since 2015, you've been using our debt service extension, which is about $3 million per year. But if you look at the number of buildings we have, and the one thing while you guys were all talking too, we did grow fast, so we do have this mortgage payment, but now all of our houses are 20 years old. Mm-hmm. And guess what the lifespan is on the roof, the HVAC, everything is timed to be, it's not paid off yet, but it has to be refurbished or replaced. So we're kind of in that area right now. But to answer your question, with 23 buildings that we have, what a number that we would be looking for in our capital improvement projects would be about $6 to $8 million a year. And right now the budget is nothing. We do have our debt service, which is $3 million, but that includes all the operations and maintenance and the capital projects. So, good question.
And I'm going to combine both of what both of you just said. This is why I get so passionate, and this is why it's so very important that those people not in this room, but who are in leadership positions in the community or who have positions in the community of standing, it is imperative that they understand and listen to these things, because when they make, I don't think they understand when they make comments like, oh, you have the money, how damaging that is. Because when they make sound bites like that without understanding the entire picture, and any one of us, I'm sure, would volunteer, and I'm sure anybody up here, Dr. Sparlin or Dr. Pesky would be glad. We've done this in the past where we have met with government bodies and sat down and said, here you go, like, we'll show you the picture, right? We've got no problem showing you the picture. And this is where it's confounding to me why someone would not want to understand or see this picture. To your credit, Jen, and exactly what you're saying, right? Like, until you immerse yourself in it, you really don't get it. I would even argue that some people who have come in here don't fully get it, right? And that's why, again, I asked for these projections the way I did. And I'm not alone. I'm not saying I'm the only one. But I really think this is very important. And I can only hope that those people out there in important roles will look at this. Because if what you're asking for, which you're about to see tonight, if what you're asking for is to hold the levy, then don't just make it about to raise taxes or not. You're not asking about raising taxes or not. You're asking about whether to levy or make millions and millions of dollars worth of cuts. Or you're hoping EBF comes through, or you're asking about making tens of millions of dollars of cuts. So don't come in here and vote against the levy, or don't say I'm against someone who's in favor of making sure we have funds for evidence-based formula, unless you're walking in with a stack full of tens of millions of dollars worth of cuts. And it is an election. Hold your elected officials who currently hold office and aren't up for election and who are currently running, call them. Put them on the spot and ask them about this, because I'm telling you, I must have watched 100 things today and nobody's talking about education. Talking about every issue except this, right? And these numbers are alarming.
Yeah, so I know
we
we
have to be realistic. Yeah, I mean, we have to deal in reality.
Yeah.
So.
No, I was just trying to give
Okay.
Dr. Pesky the ability to move along.
Okay.
And I apologize.
I do appreciate the conversation, and just one of the undertones of the message that we had at the Community Advisory Committee was to break it down on a per pupil basis. Because when you're talking like $215 million, it's like, wow, how much more money do you need? Well, that $215 million in our expenditures every year breaks down to about $12,500 per pupil. Another example we used was transportation. We have an $11 million transportation budget. That sounds like a tremendous amount of money. Well, we transport 11,500 kids every day, every year. And that $11 million breaks down to $1,000 per student per year, or about $5 a day. That includes gas and salaries and the leases on the buses. So it sounds like enormous dollars, but when you break it down by what is the student benefit from that expenditure, you really need to look at it, and it's not as much as you think.
And then relative to the average,
And
and that's where we are much lower than the average.
But I also put it back on you, Dr. Petsky, and the rest of the administration, the communication department. You have to connect the dots for the community. Yeah. And we traditionally and historically have not done that well. And we could have a lot more people that walked out of the CAC last week that were like, wow, I didn't know that, if we get better at communicating that. So we really need, we've talked about going into homeowners, clubhouses in our different neighborhoods and talking with realtors and all that. That stuff needs to happen, because almost at least once a week, there's somebody saying, I'm moving to Oswego, how are the schools? People say the narrative, everything, and I'm in there trying as a board member to say, here, come do this, do that. We need to get better about that. So I encourage you, and I put that back on the administration's plate to find a place. We have a website let's get it. And then I think Teresa's done a phenomenal job this year of making sure that all schools follow suit when the district comes out with some information, and you get to see it across the district at every school. That's really important. So let's utilize, those sources.
Good. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate the conversation. And that just started because Eugene asked one question. What's not on that top line? So the top line again on the projections are the 5 accounts that are reflected in these 5-year projections. And that'll be important because when I show you the year-over-year variance, I do include the debt service and the capital project accounts in that variance. So we'll show you what that looks like when we get there.
To Eugene's point, though, can you also talk about how we cannot transfer some funds to other funds, and that came up a lot with in the last year or so.
Yep. So on this first scenario, what you're looking at now in the top black line in white lettering are the accounts that are represented, but in the kind of salmon orange colored line below that, this is what I call our FY23 base scenario. So all of the assumptions that I feel are going to realistically happen are built into this assumption. That's what I went through just before showing this slide on the numbers. So when you look at these numbers, the next what you see are the columns. So you see the budget for FY 2022 last year and how that relates to our projected budget and spending in FY 23. Then next to that, there's a percent change from one year to the next year, and then it goes on with the projected year 2024, 2025, 2026, and 2027. So looking at that 5-year time span across the top, we first look at our revenue, and we really look at our 3 large revenue sources, which is local, state, and federal dollars. So following that across, you can see in local projections, that's where I estimate what the levy is doing with CPI and increasing the levy based on the CPI. For evidence-based funding, you'll see that under the state revenue that I've increased that 4% every year now, or 4%, so it goes up by about $4 million per year after that. And federal is a little confusing because last year we had 23 million. Now this year in federal dollars we've got 14 million. Next year it goes to 13 million. That's because of the ESSER dollars. And that's balanced. What we're bringing in as revenue, we're spending. So
what are ESSER dollars?
ESSER dollars, emergency dollars that were given to us for COVID. Thank you, Eugene. I'm getting lost in the acronyms.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
So our typical federal income is about $8.5 to $10 million. So that's about normal for us, revenue and normal expenditures. But because of the ESSER dollars, the COVID dollars, it's a little bit higher. So you can take a look at the green line there and take a look at what our revenues are projected to be over the next 5 years. And then you look at our expenditures. And what I like about how this is presented is, as you recall, we're very much a people organization. So 80 to 85% of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. So the way we've broken up the expenditures are, you can see we've got $235 million in revenue in FY22, but right below it there we've got $181 million in salary and benefits. And then everything else we do, professional services, utilities, transportation leases, technology, everything else is built into the other. So if you look at that, our other spending is about $50 million. Jared?
Question about that, since you bring that up. If the labor market does not improve and the state either stays pat or there's no change in mandates, and we continue to have to increase what we have to outsource for services, and the amount of services that we have to provide either stays stagnant or increases, could some of these figures change? In other words, if we have to provide more outservicing, which typically costs more money, could we actually see this number drop as far as the overall revenues?
The overall expenditures, you mean?
Well, expenditures go up, right? Could we see expenditures actually increase based off of what you have here?
Yeah. Depending on what we do, I think that it's a conversation we have about with our associated or our bargained agreements and where our salaries are and what we're able to fill and what our staffing looks like. So you can see the financial impact of the staffing picture is huge. It's 80 to 85% of our budget. So if we have to outsource and spend more money, then yes, you could see these numbers change.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last number to point out here, then below the revenues and the expenditures, then is what is the surplus or the deficit? How much money do we have? And as you can see in FY22, we had $4.1 million in surplus. This year in FY23, we're expected to see about $4.1 million in a surplus. And then in FY24, you can follow that along, we've got about $2.5 million. Now, I think a really important point to talk about that surplus is the board is also not at a fund balance. Right now, we're in a situation where we need to issue tax anticipation warrants every year to the tune of about $25 million because of cash flow. So we really bring our revenue in twice a year, but we have to spend our expenditures every 2 weeks. And so there's a little misalignment between when we collect the money and when we're able to spend the money. In order to not have or not borrow money, we're supposed to have about a 20 to 25% fund balance. And
what's that dollar amount?
A dollar amount is about $50 million. And as you can see from these projections, right now we're at 11% or a $25 million fund balance. We're half of what we need. That's why, again, we have $25 million that we can use for cash flow, but in a few months, we're going to need $25 million more. We don't have it. So I got to borrow $25 million. There's our $50 million. So $50 million for that cash flow, I would not have to pay.
And what does that cost us?
It costs us anywhere from $200,000 to $350,000 a year.
And correct me if I'm wrong, in some cases, we are literally giving that money to neighboring school districts. So in theory, taxpayers from this school district are giving money to other school districts
Because
and
they're
their kids.
lending it to us.
Those are
borrowing
public sale of bonds. Anyone can buy the debt, the bonds that we issue. And yes, sometimes we have neighboring school districts buy that debt. They have cash balances where they are, hey, here, borrow, $10 million from us, and then pay us $100,000 in interest for that. So we have had other local school districts buy our bonds so that we can cover our cash flow.
So I'm interested in best practice.
Mm-hmm.
Best practice is 20 to 25%. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so
I would.
The reason I bring this up here is because some people are like, wow, wait a minute, you got $4.1 million in surplus? Well, we strategically did that to reach the board's goal of a 20% fund balance so we don't have to borrow money. So with that $4 million surplus, we can add it to the $25 million fund balance that we have. Now we're at $29 million. We're almost there. We just need to be up to $50 million.
And the other thing that we have been doing is paying off those early so that we can save
something.
I mean, it's not a huge amount of money, but save $20,000 here, save $17,000 here in those interest payments that are going out. So when we pay them off early, so that's, I mean, it all adds up, right?
It does.
So this isn't a new board objective. This is something that, right, and it's been very low, so it's creeping up. And again, so it's best practice. And then also, if we didn't get those ESSER funds during COVID, we would have just gone bankrupt.
No, because what we did, we increased and we were able to get staffing. So we actually took that revenue in and we spend those expenditures. But we were able to balance some of the initiatives that we had in progress and kind of supplement so we didn't have to use district dollars. We
Well,
could use
kind of what I'm saying is if we had an extended issue and didn't get extra revenue, but we
We would
had
not have had
extra
that
expenses.
Right, but you're also
Evidence-
gonna wanna
yeah.
continue those programs, and you have no more ESSER funds.
Yeah, and part of the
Evidence-based
projection
formula
is
too.
building that in. For instance, we built.
My point is it's an emergency fund as well. It-
After 2024, what we want to keep is built into the budget projections.
So like the 1.8 million in instructional leaders, we will be able to hang on to.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so then, you know how you talked about the report that has the capital projects on it?
Yeah.
And you said it costs about $8 million a year, but we have $0.
Yeah.
So we went out and got bonds?
We sold
We
debt
sold-
service extension bonds,
sold-
about $3 million a year. to
Right.
the project.
So in other words, just like tax anticipation warrants, which we use to pay for our operations, we're doing the same thing with our debt on the capital side by issuing bonds.
Yes.
So we're borrowing a lot of money to pay for our operations, et cetera.
Renovations. and-
Yep.
Well, as Dr. Pesky just kind of mentioned in what you said, this is a best case scenario here. This first scenario that we're looking at, and Mr. Gatewood, you mentioned, or Dr. Pesky, you mentioned that we spend 6 to 8 million for capital projects. You look at the surplus, and I put the air quotes up there on purpose. You see there's only 1 year where there's a surplus of 6 million, but in actuality, we have 6 to 8 million dollars worth of capital projects every year. So you can look at it a couple different ways. One way, we're trying to build a fund balance, not to issue TAWs, and another, we could be using all of this money that's quoted as a surplus towards capital projects and not building the fund balance.
Correct.
And then but then there's a whole nother thought of the things that we want to do and need to do that we can't do.
Educationally.
Yeah. And that is where, and I'm not trying to harp on it tonight, but what we have done historically is really hurting us right now. And that 50 million, I mean, whatever it might be, it's somewhere around $50 million. And then you compound it over the last 25 years or 20 years. I mean, we're really having to make really hard decisions. And
Still.
when it comes to the fact that what Jared hit upon, where we're paying nurses, we're paying bus drivers outside of our own people, and because of the issues we have, whereas if we could have fulfilled those and come forward with a more robust situation, maybe we wouldn't have to do that. And that's what I was saying, where we need some more visionary thinking to figure out how we can stop living today, and we can live today and in the future.
We've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when we have when we show our comprehensive facilities plan, and we have all these items on our list of priorities, we're borrowing money just to get those things done.
Right now, we are our debt service extension.
Yep.
But in year 2026, I do build $1.5 million into capital projects, so that fund balance reflects a minus $1.5 million to put into capital projects. And then next year in FY27, I do build that up to $3 million. So we would have $3 million a year towards capital improvement projects, but that's still about 3 to 5 million short of what we realistically would need to get.
But do we have a comprehensive maintenance plan right now that can keep that stuff instead of 15 years
Yeah, that's
for
where,
25?
for instance, the plan that we have right now, the Wheatlands roof was just replaced in 2020, and the Wheatlands roof is already an expenditure 22 years from now. So we know in 22 years how much money we have to spend that year
Right, but
and replace that roof and the HVACs and all.
I'm talking about a maintenance plan so that we can extend the life of those things.
Preventative
We
maintenance
don't
plan is
have
what you're referring
right.
to, right?
Yeah, that's where the preventative maintenance plan comes into play.
You know, this is a good conversation. We still have more scenarios to go through. But what is important is notice is that the projected fund balance, we are moving in the right direction.
Absolutely.
We're moving in the right direction, and because you are comparing apples to apples, and by the year 2026, with what we're currently doing, we will be in the best financial shape this district's been in a very, very, very long time.
Well, hold on. We might be
If.
moving in the right direction.
Let's look at the next
We have to look at these other slides.
Oh,
like if
correct.
this happens,
again, if you levy and evidence-based funding comes in at full
Correct.
funding every year,
Yep.
this should be a reality. Exactly. So go ahead on the next slide.
All right. So the next slide is, let's see. There we go. You guys want to lower that one, Pete?
This is no new EBF.
So now this projection is just like the one above it, but if you look in the scenario column there, this one it's still the 5 funds that we're looking at, but this is no new EBF. So now to clarify that, last year we got $80 million from the state in evidence-based funding. And this year, we were projected to get a 4% increase, or about $84 to $85 million. But some districts ended up moving from Tier 1 to Tier 2, and it left more dollars available to be given. We're still in a Tier 1 scenario. And so we ended up getting $5 million more dollars than I had planned on. So we got a 9% increase in evidence-based funding. So we went from $80 million to $89 million. Now the rest of the projections, or the rest of the years, I still have a 4% increase in there. So that's kind of the wild card, is how is the state going to fund that? The point I want to make here, though, is our foundation level right now with evidence-based funding is $89 million. It's what we got this year. Next year, we are guaranteed $89 million. But like you guys were talking, with inflation and everything else, if we get $89 million and we stay static, but our expenditures go up, it puts us in a deficit situation. So they've been adding about $300 to $350 million to the evidence-based funding formula every year, and our district has benefited that in an extra 4%, or this year an extra 9%, or $9 million in extra evidence-based funding. So when we say on this scenario, no new EBF, that doesn't mean EBF goes away. That just means that we're held at $89 million. So these projections, everything is the same. Local and federal revenues and the expenditures, everything's the same, except if you look at the state revenue line going across, you'll see that we are locked in that not making a 4% increase. We're staying at about $89 million in evidence-based funding for all those scenarios.
So how much of the $9 million went into our fund balance?
That's where the 4.1 million surplus that we're projected to have is. So from the $9 million we got from the state, you could say, well, that extra $4 million is going into the fund balance.
Okay. So in other words, we're trying to stay within our means, and whatever extra we get, we are putting it in our fund balance.
It could count towards our fund balance.
Could or does?
It does. I'm just saying that these are projections. So if another roof catches fire,
right.
I mean, that could be
well,
$2-3
that's what
million.
contingencies are for, right? I mean,
that was my point. Is that this is also emergency funds?
Yeah, right. Because if we're taking money and we're getting extra money and we're spending extra money, then we're not doing anything.
Right. And I feel the district has a really good handle on where they are with their expenditures and their revenue, and they've been holding themselves to that kind of budgeting expectation.
But if there is no addition, I think this is the piece, though, that I think is important to point out to people. If there is no additional funding for the evidence-based formula, so there's a minimum that they're supposed to under the law, I think it's like $350 million, somewhere around there, that they're supposed to add. If there's no additional funding, so that's additional on top of what we already have, by 2027, we need to make $9 million worth of cuts. That's even if we levy every year, we still need to figure out a way. I don't think people understand how much the evidence-based formula is affecting us. And like I said, you turn on the political ads, no one's talking about education. I don't care what they're running for, no one's talking about education. I would love for somebody to talk about education, because I'm saying if there's no additional funding for this formula, we have to come back here and make $9 million worth of cuts by 2027.
20 million in cuts.
No, you're on the wrong one. $9 million. You're
9
on the
million
wrong
in one
one.
year.
And he's cumulative.
9 million by 2027.
In 1 year. Then if you
I
add
get
all
it.
those
I
four
get
of those
it.
years,
I
that's
get
$20
it.
million in cuts.
So next year, this year we would be, because we got our evidence-based funding increase. So as you look in FY23, we're projected to have a $4.1 million surplus because we know we're getting evidence-based funding. Next year, this model assumes that we're held at the 89 million. We don't get any additional EBF. So that, without any additional EBF, we would have to cut $1 million next year.
Right.
Then the year after that, 2025, we would have to cut an additional $4 million. Then the year after
Dominic's
that,
right.
$5 million. Then in 2027,
Yeah, 'cause it's rolling, yeah.
in 1 year, we'd have to cut $9 million. So it is a cumulative $20 million.
Dominic's right. I'm wrong.
We know who to look at when we
There's
want to talk
there's
about
a
this.
parallel discussion we also need to have. We are also moving closer to our target, our EBF target. And so there will become a day where we will become tier 2 and we will not get as much funding. So that, when I talk about this, like we need to look towards the future, that's the other thing we have to start realizing is that there is going to come a day where whoever decided the EBF funding is going to say, okay, District 308, you're no longer, you're no longer a tier 1, you're a tier 2.
Can I get into the math just a little bit? Dr. Sparlin, how many other districts are further away from tier 2 than us?
How many are further away? There are districts that are further away, so we're at 66% adequacy. There's, I believe right now, the lowest I've seen, it's could be 59, but I think 61 is the number.
Are any of those top 50 school districts? Like budget-wise?
Budget-wise,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so these are relatively small.
Small
So I'm wondering
districts,
what
right.
happens when we get into tier 2 when everybody else is in tier 2. So
Well,
that'd be, I mean,
well, tier 2, the other 49% of the rest of the dollars goes to tier 2. So I mean, it's a good thing.
That would be
it's a good thing when you
100%
get to
though,
tier
then,
2
right?
because it's 99%. Tier 1, to tier 3 and 4 only get 1%. They don't get much because they don't need much.
but as there's less school districts in tier 1, then where are they going to allocate those funds?
Well, the idea is for no school districts to be in tier
Right.
1 or
Exactly.
tier 2, and they're all tier 3 and 4. Because when you get to
So
tier
they're not
3
going to
and
do
4,
the
you're at your
additional $350
90%
million
of your
is what you're
adequacy.
saying.
I
Okay.
guess
Yeah.
my point is that at some point, the governor, whatever the powers that be, are going to look back at this. So we need, Jared has
need a
said
plan.
it. We have all said it. We have to continue to look at these scenarios because it will change. It will change.
Yeah, but that's the idea. I mean, that is the idea. We do not want to stay as a tier 1 school district.
Right.
The faster we get there, the better. And as long as the EBF is funded, we will get there that much sooner. And that's why when we talk about what people can do is to advocate for School District 308 in regards to the EBF model is the prime thing that they can do when they're talking with state legislators to ensure that at minimal that $350 is added annually.
Good. So model number 2 is all of the base assumptions, but this only isolates EBF if we do not get additional EBF money. The third scenario then is looking at, and Peter, yeah, there you go, if you could fix that. This one is if there is no, whoop, I skipped
No, you missed one.
back
No
one more.
EBF
There you go.
or
Fix
levy.
that one, maybe, Peter. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
So now, evidence-based funding, the state revenue is held at a 4% increase, but what we did here is kind of the same thing, levy. What I'll talk about next month is a little bit more specifically about the levy, but basically the way the levy works is if we got 231 million in revenue last year, we get 231 million next year, plus CPI and a few little calculations, but you get whatever you asked for. If you don't ask for the full levy amount, you don't get it. And you will, the reason they say you'll never get it again or it compounds is because now, wait, you had 231, now you multiply that by 2%, you could get X amount of dollars. But if you don't, if you ask for only 231 and not the 2%, then the next year you're limited to what you collected. So it impacts you cumulatively from then on. So what this is saying, if you look at the local revenue, that's where you'll see the no new levy. What that means is, I guess an easy way to say it, there's a bunch of other local revenue sources in there, but what you'll see is in 2023, we increased it by 4.6% because we levied our full amount. Then next year, and that's because the levy went up by 5%. Next year, I have the levy going up 2%, and there's some other state funding, and so that one projects a 2% increase, but then every year after that, you'll see the levy or the local dollars are held constant at about 127 million, 128 million, 128 million, where if you look at the previous scenarios, in 2026, we should be at $136 million from local revenue. But if you hold the levy constant, you will be $8 million less than what you would be, what you would qualify for.
So again, we'd have to make $8 million worth of cuts by 2027.
Yep, very good. So that you can see how the not levying the full amount puts us in a deficit situation by 2025. And then the doomsday scenario is no new EBF and no new levy dollars added, and that one is just a compilation of both no EBF and no levy. So you're looking at a 2027 projected deficit of $20 million. So
$43 million worth of cuts by 2027.
Yep. So, all right, thank you. I really appreciate your time and attention on that one. Yeah, Tom.
You said you were gonna, I don't think it needed to be part of this presentation, but you said that you were going to extrapolate kind of the cost of the policy. You could just say the cost of it now, how it impacts the budget.
The cost of the policy.
The policy change.
The fees.
I don't think he has, you don't have that information right now, do you?
No, I don't have that for fees.
Okay.
Right now. I'll, because I'm coming up with 3 different scenarios. So.
Well, this is only dealing with, eliminating the punitive piece, and so the assumption I would say is that 0% collection.
Yeah. On athletics or on participation fees?
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario types of things.
So worst case scenario, I think right now that's about $600,000.
Now, I remember seeing it was like $1.2 million in uncollected.
In uncollected fees.
But that's an accumulation of
fees.
13 years of school. So my assumption was that it's essentially about $100,000 a year is the cost of that.
$100,000 of uncollected fees
per year.
I don't know if it's that simple. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
But
if it was 12 million over a 13-year span, I was just kind of. That's why I was. I'm not saying that I looked at the numbers or can. I'm just trying to put a cost to that policy.
I'll look at those and I'll bring those to you. The one assumption I do have in here is between registration fees and academic fees. In the assumptions, I do have $2.7 million in revenue from fee collection. So if we make a change in that policy, it's not going to be $2.7 million in revenue. It will be whatever those options we decide are.
And yeah, and I think that the, what's the worst case scenario, likely scenario, et cetera. So.
Yeah.
And there's a danger here too, just so we're clear. If we don't levy, and then something happens with EBF, we're looking at 3 million, right? Or almost 3 million, 2.5, 2.6, almost 2.6 million that we know we got to make. Because if something happens with the evidence-based formula next year for some reason, so there's a danger also on that one with this scenario.
Elements we need to keep our eye on for sure.
So the bumper sticker is no levy, cut cost.
Again,
Is that what you're saying?
I just think that the narrative in the community has been oversimplified.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, fine, if that's what you want to hold the levy, it's your right to feel that way, but don't oversimplify it. Then come with a list of cuts. Don't just show up here and say, "Oh, I don't want the levy." Put your money where your mouth is, and show up with what you're cutting. I mean, what are you cutting?
And that's where I've challenged.
Don't just show up and say you're gonna not have a levy, and then show up with some cuts.
And
We
here's
spend
the impact
average per
directly
pupil
to our
about, what,
students.
15-20% less per student.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what, a cut is impactful,
Yeah.
Show up with the cuts.
Any
That's
cut,
my
when
vote
you're
for
already relatively lean, any cut is a big deal.
But raising taxes for community members who can't afford it in this environment is also impactful.
I get it. Then show up with the cuts. What are the cuts then? What are they? I mean, they have to be real too, though. They can't just be talking points that aren't real. Like, we can't just say, oh, paper and water bottles. That's not $3 million worth of cuts. I mean, that's not real. 85% of the budget is staff. So you're gonna cut staff. You're gonna hold wages. That's what you're talking about. That's actual cuts. I mean, you're not talking, or you're gonna cut sports. You could do that.
We've just reinstated junior high. That was about 900,000. That needs gonna come off the block, and then high school.
Right, but by the same token, I'm struggling with, you have to do this or else. There are people in this
But that's
community.
reality.
Right, and I understand that, but there are people in this community who either don't have kids in the school district who you have to reach out to. There are people in this community who can't afford rent or food, and they're making decisions that.
And that's why I said what I said. Don't oversimplify things, though.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just that. It's come with the list of cuts then, right? And they got to be real. It can't just be like, I get what you're saying. I'm not dismissing that piece, right? I make it clear. Heck, my family goes back in this area like 6 generations, right? I get it. I don't want to move out of here either, right? I mean, every Memorial Day I got to drive around to about 7 or 8 different plots in this area, right, to decorate tombstones. I get it. But at the same time, like, don't leave pieces of this out. Don't leave pieces of the conversation out. You got to have the entire conversation, which is, okay, there are people struggling in this community. We can't afford this. So here's what we're going to cut. Here's my list of cuts. Like, you got to give them the whole narrative. You can't just leave pieces of the narrative out. It can't be.
I think there's even another elephant in the room, which is priority of public education. That is what's happening. We're seeing it across the country. We're seeing it in politics. There are those that prioritize the education of students, a public education of students, and there are those that don't. And so that's really where this discussion is.
And one last point, and I'll be quiet. The other point, too, is if we have the money to spend on these political action committees, because they got tons of money. Go look at all the money that these politicians have. They got the money, then I'm struggling with how there isn't money out there. Like, I mean, I can turn on the TV and I can see money getting spent left and right. So there's money out there. It's just that we as a society aren't spending it here.
No,
and the community
Yeah.
community members who are hurting, to your point, don't have it. But there's clearly money out there somewhere.
No, I mean, I was just saying there's just a lot. There's even more pieces. There's,
Agreed.
There's the village, there's commercial, there's the amount of residents, the debt service per resident. There's so many things. The number of students in the schools relative to the number of students or relative to the number of people in the district or taxpayers. So, I've been myself, I don't want to mix things, but I'm on the planning and zoning committee and commission for the village, and I whenever I'm making decisions, I'm always having that, and I'm trying to bring the overall tax bill down for the average person. So a lot of the decisions I make, I've always got that in mind, because there's so many pieces to your actual tax bill and what impacts that.
Yeah.
So.
Very good discussion.
Yeah, all right, you got one more to go. Go ahead.
Document, and this one is the variance report that Jen has been alluding to, and this kind of shows our spending, now historical spending. So going back to 2019, what you'll see there now in the black column across the top in white letters, you'll see the 2 extra funds added. So we've got, in addition to education, operations and maintenance, transportation, IMRF, and working cash, we also have our debt service and our capital projects funds mixed into these totals. So what we did at the top here, if you look, the AFR stands for our annual financial report. That's actually what's been audited. And then if you go down the line, there's what we budgeted in 2022 and what we project in 2023. So there's a little bit of overlap with our scenarios that we just reviewed. But the AFRs, after we're audited, we put those actual expenditures in there. So here what we did, a little different than the 5-year projections, we actually have the salaries and the benefits as an expenditure, and we total that line. So you can see in 2019, we spent $165,000. The next year we spent 171, or rather million. And then you can see 176 million, 181 million. And so you can see what those numbers are for salaries and benefits. But then we also broke out, instead of just calling it other, we broke it out into the different objects that it could be, like purchase services, supplies and materials, capital outlay, which is things $5,000 or more. Non-capital equipment, $5,000 or less, and then any provisions for contingencies and termination that we don't use. But that way you can kind of see some of those other areas of spending, and what we're looking at there. Some of these numbers, you'll have to look at it between the expenses and the revenue, because where in one line it looks like, why did we increase so much? And why do we decrease the next year? Well, again, we had this opportunity with the ESSER dollars. So we saw a larger expenditure because we also had a larger revenue that year. So you need to look at the revenues and the expenditures at the same time. So then below that, below the red, we give you the same funds and what the revenue is from local property taxes, state, and then federal revenue. And you can kind of see the difference then between the revenue and the expenditures, now including the capital projects and the debt service. You'll see where in the 5-year projection scenario, the first one, we were projecting this year to have a $4.1 million fund balance. Well, now when we add the capital projects and the debt service with their spending and their funds, the real picture is a $2.2 million surplus. So that's when we look at those other accounts and what we've got budgeted to spend, adding those accounts adds a little bit more granularity to the financial picture of the district. So I wanted to provide that. I know that, you know, the 5-year projections we presented last year in the same way, with the base scenario, no new EBF, no new levy, and then no new EBF and levy. So you saw that last year and now this year. Had a good conversation about that. But this now, the variance report, is something you haven't seen for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. So I'd be open to some board feedback on that. Does that meet your needs? Is there more you'd like to see in that area? And I'd be open to any feedback. This isn't the last time we'll be talking finances. I'll be coming back for the levy, and we'll be talking a lot about the financial picture of the district as we move into next year.
I appreciate this very, very much. And actually, this isn't what I was looking for, but this is also tells a very different story. I actually was looking more for a look back versus a look forward. So when we're looking at like this month, when we're looking at our financial reports, what is different from last year, and what is the difference between those?
So you want a monthly?
Yes. So I want to be able, we've talked about this with various board members, which is, well, and we've talked about this with disposal reports and so forth, that we're trying to connect the dots. So if last month we spent $2 million, or last year this month we spent $2 million because school finances are cyclical, and this month we're spending $4 million. What's the difference and why? We know that inflation's going to be a part of it, but we also know that we're in a curriculum cycle. So this is going to be this much, or this is going to be this much.
You know what? That would be really easy to do while you're saying that. Because every month we give the board the financial profile, so we could easily add on to that. Hey, here's your October 2022 or November
Correct.
22, but here is what it was in October of 2021. So we could actually kind of present that to you in
Right.
a month.
And so then the board members don't have to go, wait a second, we did this and we did that and we did it. The dots are connected. You can say there's a $2 million variance this year. We got a grant and we were able to do this with the grant or what have you. I guess what the reason that is important and why I keep asking for it is the transparency of understanding certain things are cyclical and certain things aren't. And it really was something that came with regard to ESSER, because that really changed our financial picture. But it's a short-term, 3 or 4 year, and so it's very important going forward. So that's really what I was looking for. But this actually.
And one other, and that's something we can definitely work in there. One other conversation I had with a board member is, while the accounts are listed at the top, they're all mixed together.
Yes.
So like the educational
Yes.
and O&M custodians and the bus driver salaries are all mixed in there.
I was like, how did he
One
do
board member wanted to
that?
see it by fund, and so we can look at kind of extracting it that way as well.
But I think it's important to know that we don't have as much control over certain aspects of the budget because it is cyclical. And so that's why it helps to have the variance in there.
Can you talk to me real quick on this page about, definitely noticed the increase in property taxes, although I realize that could also mean new property, but I'm sure that's not all it means. But I noticed our other local revenue went from 16.6 million in fiscal year 2019 to projected to be 13.6. Can you talk to me what would cause our other local revenue to drop by 3 million?
Yeah, believe it or not, that was because it went from other local revenue and it went into wait. Nope, that would have been the state. We ended up going from the National School Lunch Program and the Seamless Summer Option, and we ended up moving into a federal government as opposed to a state reimbursement program. But also, I'll have to look into that. I'll find out why that dove so much, because I've also got, I know with COVID we had, but again, that's state with our transportation reimbursement. So I'm trying to nail down exactly where 3 million in local was.
I'm just curious because as somebody who pays property taxes, I'm curious what this other local revenue is and why it's decreased.
That like other things in local are like CPPRT. I know like this year we got 2 million in CPPRT, where we got 800,000 one year, and then it went up a little bit more. It's also registration fees. And some other things in that nature. Local revenue like athletics fees, if we didn't do the athletic programs. But that's
CPPRT.
Corporate personal property replacement tax. So businesses that used to, back in 1994, they used to pay property taxes on their equipment and stuff in the business. They still have to pay a portion of that, and that changed over COVID.
So are you saying, in essence, local businesses are paying $3 million less?
No.
And I'm paying more?
No. We collected, our CPPRT totals they're typically about $1.5 to $2 million, but over COVID it went down to like 800,000. Now it's climbing back up. Our CPPRT numbers are higher. So, but that doesn't.
But if it's other, it's not higher than 2019.
Right.
So, and
it's only part of the other though. So yeah, he doesn't know.
Okay. Yeah, I won't hold you to an answer, but I would like to know.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Petsky. That was a very informative presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Petsky.
All right.
Thank
We're
you.
ready to move on to action.
9.1, action item, approval of maintenance project grant. Can I have a motion, please?
You sure can.
Hey, while she's pulling that up, so just for clarification, so you're using DSEB funds to pay for what's not covered by the grant, which extends our debt by how much this time?
It's like 0.3%, or it's on top. So we ended up borrowing $18 million, and that cost us about 0.3 points.
It was 5 years, right? 5
Which-
years?
Right,
6
well-
years.
6 years.
So we're gonna end up paying what? You're the money guy.
We're gonna over that time.
Yeah.
For $18 million, I'll have to look into that with the cost of borrowing that. It's actually, we asked to collect that. The way we get our debt service extension is not, we ended up selling the bonds and then, but collected that from.
Dr. Petsky, you could just give Bob Lewis a call. He'd have that information for you.
All right.
I make a motion to approve the application for the maintenance project grant to be submitted to ISB, the Illinois State Board of Education.
Second.
Mr. Cerrone,
Yes.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye. Aye.
Ms. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Ploger,
Aye.
Ms. Swanson, Ms. Simulton.
Aye. Motion passes 6-0. 9.2, action item, approval of new high school courses. Can I have a motion,
I
please?
have a
Oh, go ahead.
question real fast.
All right.
Me too.
I saw the change to that one course, and that was based on going to the teachers and
Yes, we went back to
Collaboration.
the department chairs, and not only did that cause some conversation around this course, but a few others, so that we can make more flexibility for students that want to take that risk to take that higher level course.
okay.
And what about the sports officiating?
The question about sports officiating for,
Well, because you have to be 17 to be in. I mean, I understand where they're going with it, but
right, so they would need to, if they could take the course and then wait to take the test until they reach that age, like we discussed at the last meeting. I guess I didn't realize there was a further question.
yeah. Then my only other question then was the program of study. Did we not come up with anything?
Yes,
for that?
that's fine, and when it goes into the course catalog, it won't be POS anymore.
Oh, yes.
Good.
Okay.
And I know I said this, and I know it may seem trivial, but I think these courses are great, and I just want to make sure that the description of it is listed when they're registering. Because if it's not, people may miss it, gloss over it, or not understand the content of the class.
Okay,
I make a motion to approve the proposed new high school courses for the 2023-24 school year as presented.
Second.
Ms. Swanson, Mr. Cerrone,
Aye.
Ms. Simulton,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Ms. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Ploger.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. Action item 9.3, approval of destruction of the audio recordings. Can I have a motion, please?
I make a motion to approve the destruction of the audio recordings of the closed session meetings from October 26, 2020 through April 12, 2021.
Second.
Ms. Simulton,
Aye.
Ms. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Ploger,
No.
Ms. Johnson,
No.
Mr. Cerrone,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 4-3.
Two.
4-2. Okay. Action item 9.4, approval of the release of closed session minutes. Can I have a motion, please?
I make a motion to make available no closed session minutes at this time due to a determination that it continues to be necessary to protect the public interest or the privacy of an individual by keeping them confidential.
Second.
Ms. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Gatewood,
Aye.
Mr. Cerrone,
Aye, but the reason is based on the privacy part of individuals, so go ahead. But aye.
Mr. Ploger,
Aye.
Ms. Swanson? Ms. Simulton?
Aye. Motion passes 6-0. Can I have motion to go back into closed session?
I make a motion to return to,
Wait,
or to
we gotta
enter
do the
closed
personnel.
session under statute 5 ILCS 120/2C1, the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of certain employees and individuals.
Second.
So we're going to do 9